Hi, Barbara. It's so lovely to have you today joining us here on the World of Difference podcast for this conversation.
Hey, Lori, good to be here. Thank you so much.
We're going to talk about some work that you do today, but first, I wanted to start with kind of your differences, what differences you're making bringing to the table for us today. Tell us a little bit about how you grew up. How did your early life shape your understanding of relationships and family dynamics, and how does that inform the work that you're doing now?
Wow, that's a great question. And I like what your whole platform is about, talking about differences, because, the name Barbara actually means barbarian or alien, outlander, different.
Lovely.
Only when I was older that I thought, yeah, well, I am an alien in this world, so maybe that's okay. But I was raised by people who were survivors of World War II atrocities and, encampment. My father, being half Jewish, was under the Nazis, and he had to escape from the communists. And there were a lot of horrendous things they experienced, but they came to America in the 50s, got married, and me and my sisters are first generation. And we were raised in a household where my mother didn't even understand what a Girl Scout was. And I wanted to be a brownie. And she goes, I'm not buying an outfit. If I can't sew it, forget it. So that was it for Girl Scouts.
Aw,
And I know, I mean, which they didn't know, they didn't do the
right.
American thing. And we grew up talking about Americans like we weren't Americans. It's kind of
Mm,
like My Big Fat Greek Wedding, where that Greek family is like Greek, but living in America, but they're kind of not. So
yeah.
I was so clear about differences, starting with the different languages my family in Europe spoke, the different experience my parents had, the difference I left New York and went to school in North Carolina, and boy, was I different,
Oh,
different
yeah.
than the North Carolinians. Then I left New York and went to California and lived in San Francisco. And I, again, was very different. So now I live in Oregon, and people go, yeah, you're from California. You're different. I'm like, no, no, no. I was Oregon. I tell people I was Oregonized in my heart already as a Californian.
Oh,
I wanted to be
I
an
love it.
Oregonian. So, I also was, raised in one faith, Catholicism. I left. I totally rejected God and Catholicism, and even wrote Jesus a Dear John letter in college. I was very clear, like, let's be clear. I know who you are, but I'm not interested. But I came to faith at age 39 and had a whole revolutionary understanding of what it was all about finally. And that made me feel different in some
Mm,
ways, in a good way. But and then in my life, the revelation of neuro profiles being different, meaning my son at age 18, finally having him diagnosed as being high functioning autism. And at the time, they didn't catch his ADHD, but he has that as well, which is when we realized that his dad, my first husband, we had already parted in the marriage after 20 years, that he also was neurodivergent, high functioning Asperger's, or back then it was Asperger's, now it's autism, and ADHD. And I had already remarried, and I found out several years ago that my second husband was also on the spectrum. Um, but then I realized that, looking back and learning about neuroprofiles and neurology and what does it mean to be neurodivergent, I realized, oh my goodness, my best friend growing up, her father, my dentist, her brother, my uncle, my grandfather, there, I began to see neurodiversity in many flavors and presentations, all different, all unique. I mean, there is a saying in the neurodiverse community: if you've met one neurodiverse person, well, you've met one neurodiverse person. So they're like snowflakes. They're all snowflakes, but they're all different, right? So,
hmm
and looking, that gave me so much permission to really begin to see how people were all wired uniquely, and not just the wiring, but what had happened to them in their families of origin, in their growing up. I knew my parents' trauma had really colored their understanding of themselves, their lives, how they saw their opportunities in life. And I began to really understand taking responsibility and accepting my differences and accepting others people's differences, and looking to encourage and find common ground for growth and shared support, was kind of where I started really going with all that.
I just think you beautifully summarized so much of our podcast, which is whether it's our immigration series or we've had multiple episodes around neurodiversity. Of course, the language and culture aspect of diversity, and then realizing ultimately, yes, the neurodiverse community is, like a snowflake. You meet one, they're all unique. And at the same time, humanity as a whole is that way. But today we're going to talk about, specifically some things around the neurodiverse community because it's not the majority of the population. And so most cultures around the world have been formed for neurotypical people. And therefore, even though this is a normal part of human experience, there are many people throughout time who have always been neurodiverse. We have created our societies to work best for people who are neurotypical. Therefore, the struggle is a lot of times in the systems or in the institutions. And we're going to talk a little bit about the institution of marriage. And that looks unique everywhere. Like you mentioned, my big fat Greek wedding, very different experience than some other, people who have weddings in like Thailand, for example, or Indonesia, where I lived for 10 years. So wedding ceremonies and marriages can look very unique. But I think that, your whole subject matter expertise around relationships, having lived experience yourself. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the book that you've been a part of. But you have navigated personally in your neurodiverse family with both of your husbands and your son being autistic, ADHD. And so curious about a couple things. You can maybe combine this question or answer however you want. First of all, it's how are relationships between someone who is autistic and someone who isn't? How are those different? And how did your whole lived experience impact your approach to relationships personally and professionally in light of all of that?
Great. We love that question. So, the first part of the question, how are neurodiverse relationships different? And I would first of all say all human relationships are challenging. People are not born just getting each other or on the same wavelength or being great listeners or communicators. Um, Having said that, an additional complexity to neurodiverse relationships is that one person in the relationship may be thinking and seeing the world in a very different way, maybe perceiving the world, processing the information, and sharing or giving out information and behaviors in a very different way than the other. Okay, so uh, just to very much generalize here because there's all kinds of flavors of everything. I will say I was more typical. So this word means not normal because norm only means statistically more people are like me than not. That's all that means, right? And I fall into that more relational, connective. I bonded with my mother and father and people in a relational way. I was interested in relationship. I probably had oxytocin positive experiences growing up that made me feel inclined to relational connectivity. I don't mind eye contact. I don't mind physical touch. I'm not hypersensitive to anything that would put me off of being with people. Sight, sound, smells, visual, any of that. And I found I feel more energized by being with people, right? So that's been a plus for me. Now, neurodiverse people, for a lot of reasons, are wired differently. A small child, and I even remember my son being like this, he wouldn't mind engaging for a while, but he would tap out on the eye contact and the touch and feel a lot faster than my daughter ever did. She could never get enough. Now, she's neurotypical. He's not. Instead of looking at me, he really wanted to watch the ceiling fan spinning around. And when kids at young ages are more interested in the systems, the patterns, the tech, the analysis, they are making sense of their world in different ways. He had Thomas the Tank Engine toys, which are all different colors. He would line them up according to size and toy and color. And I'm like, that's an interesting way to play with your trains, but that's so classic. I mean, the kids do these things they're finding different elements. And so they don't necessarily pay attention to the relational language being spoken around them, the subtle behavioral or nonverbal tone, the looks, the facial stuff. They're looking at the ceiling fan, the truck, the wheel, the patterns. They're seeing reality. They're focusing on amazing things that I completely missed, but they're focusing on different things. And so it's not worse, it's not better, it's different, right? And so I would always be a little amazed and fascinated, but a little confused that he could spend hours with Legos. But if Aunt so and so came over, it was like 5 minutes max. He wanted to go back to do his thing. Whereas my daughter she was able to hang for hours and couldn't get enough of the people, right? So that is kind of the difference. And when people look at outward appearances, the another complexity here is that my son learned at a young age that more people were behaving the way I was or his sister were than the way he was. And he's very intelligent. Many people are very gifted that are neurodiverse on a lot of levels. And he kind of figured out and didn't even know that everybody is behaving this way, so he should behave that way too. He did well, but he was faking it. He was masking, is what that's called, and didn't even know that none of us were masking. This was how we were. He didn't know he was masking. He thought we were all masking. Like, this is what everybody does, right? Everybody wants to go, well, look at the ceiling fan and play with Legos. But, some people are better at showing up and playing with each other. I don't know. So there's a lot of lack of self-awareness that we all have at different ages as we get older. Some of us are a little more interested because we get feedback relationally from other people. And if we're not too prideful, we're a little bit more correctable, receptive, adjusting ourselves to be more in sync relationally. Well, neurodivergent people are hoping not to be too stressed by the expectations that the relational world puts on them. They're like, yeah, if I have to sit and talk to the ant for more than 5 minutes, I'm going to go nuts. And they're they're a lot stressed out sometimes, trying to fit into the relational demands. And so unless they're helped to understand that they can calm down and self-soothe and it's okay, but oftentimes people make demands and have expectations that are not in alignment with the reality of what people feel most gifted and able to be relationally. And a lot of people get married because many neurodivergent people say, well, everybody's expecting me to get married. And they even pick up what the form and format of courtship or marriage is supposed to look like. And they can play a part very well when they want to. And so they go through that, and their spouse, who may be neurotypical, is thinking, oh, we've got a relational person here. And then they get married, and now on the honeymoon even, or shortly into the relationship, there's like, okay, I've got her, or I've got him. I don't have to. And now I'm going to go do my own thing and play with Legos in the ceiling fan. And the partner is like, where did you go? Where's the person I was dating? Where did they go? This is pretty classic. And over time, life catches up, and the relational and the demands of living are very stressful for everybody these days. And a neurodivergent person might have less spoons than the other. I don't know if you've ever heard of the spoon theory. It was something that came out. A woman who had some physical ailment was trying to explain to her friend why by 3:00 in the afternoon she was out. And she goes, let's say I have 10 spoons, you've got 25 spoons. Everything we do costs us a spoon. Like by 3:00, I'm out of spoons. You've got 15 left, I'm out. So this is, when we say we're out of spoons, that's what that means. That's where that comes from. And people can run out of spoons, and now they're literally topped out, maxed out, or they are powering through, and then they come home where they don't necessarily feel like, oh, my boss is going to fire me if I have a meltdown, but maybe my wife won't, or my kids won't, or my dog won't. I'm just going to lose it at home. And kids do this. They're great in school. They come home. It's like, who is this little person having a massive meltdown and a tantrum? Because they're overtaxed, right?
Yeah.
So these are some of the differences that are happening. And You're nodding your head, so I'm thinking you're somewhat familiar with maybe some
I'm
dynamics
somewhat
here.
familiar. Yeah, so many people in my life, friends, family members, coworkers. I live in Silicon Valley. We have plenty of people here statistically who are neurodiverse, and I hear some of these things over and over again. And so I think that I'm thinking about today, like if somebody who is neurodiverse is listening and maybe they are already in a relationship or they are wanting a relationship with a significant other, what are some ways that you would coach them or counsel them on how to be in a relationship with somebody who's neurotypical when they've, like you said, have spent some time masking, whether in school or at work, and they want a relationship to be a safe place where they can be themselves, but that might cause some friction with a neurotypical person who's expecting them to be somewhat different, and then they're trying to work that out. How would you advise someone?
Well, when I coach people, I actually never coach them as a couple to begin with, because each of them have different opportunities and challenges to first of all deal with themselves. Who are you? What is your profile like? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What are your anxieties, your fears, your traumas? What are your areas of expertise and confidence, your gifting? That's really important to get in touch with your own personal reality. And nowadays, in younger circles especially, neurodiversity is not a four-letter word. Autism
Right.
is not a bad association necessarily. Um, Hopefully that will grow. And the fact is, Silicon Valley spearheaded a lot of the tech that we now live with. The fact that you and I are having this Zoom or, and doing all of this is a neurodivergent world we're entering. All the tech, all the system structure, AI. I mean, honestly, the engineers who created this are most likely on the spectrum and or ADHD or both, right?
Yep.
So I think that it's important to be curious about yourself, because any relationship is only as good as how good each individual person in that relationship is, right? You can't have one really self-actualized, super healthy person and another person who's in denial, shut down, and not wanting to deal with things. That's not a healthy relationship. You're not growing together. You're in different places. I hope people want to know what their profile is. There are online assessments. You can have a professional psychological evaluation. There's all kinds of ways to get a handle on this. There's so much about it. You can read. I can give people resources to not to pigeonhole them, but to begin to figure out what flavor, what shape of a snowflake are you, right? And once you learn to accept that and understand that the other's different, they're different in these ways, this is how you are. So many of the problems that couples have, they take personally what is different. They somehow think it's the lack of communication is a rejection of them, or the inquiry and how are you feeling, what's happening with you is an attack, assault, right? And just to begin to learn, I give a lot of psychoeducation where they can begin to learn how they behave or can behave, how the other might behave, and what some of the landmines are that are going off. That has a lot to do with giving people, normalizing, like, you are not the only two people in the world that are having this problem. It's very common. And
Yeah.
these are the things we see. So that's kind of the approach I take. And if somebody doesn't want to deal with their neuroprofile, I can't work with them. I mean, I can help them on other levels, but that's a big, one man wrote in the book that we're going to talk about. He wrote about how when he discovered his neurodiversity, he felt he finally had the cheat code, the Rosetta Stone of his life, that
Wow.
explained everything to him. And he was so relieved and embraced it and got really curious, which was his wife was, it was easier to work with. And they have two neurodivergent children. So she's the minority in the family. And she's like, well, let's all find out about this.
That's wonderful. So yeah, let's talk about your upcoming book and how are you hoping it will help neurodiverse couples find hope that you're talking about and healing and a roadmap for their relationships.
Absolutely. So I am good friends with the woman and her husband who kind of captained this book, Dr. Stephanie Holmes and her husband, Dan Holmes. And they are a couple involved in living this themselves. They're pretty explicit in the book about how neurodiversity manifested in their family and in their children. They are also a faith-based couple, and they're both ordained ministers. And I actually found Dr. Holmes when I was looking for help in my second marriage. I was very blessed. It was a whole God thing. And even though I had been a biblical counselor and I was getting my master's in marriage and family therapy, and I'd done a lot of different kinds of professional work, but I was coming kind of out of retirement to get more involved with better ministry to couples, and meeting her and realizing, yeah, my husband is on, likely on the spectrum. Um, she unlocked a whole understanding of how to approach this. And in working with us, now, sadly, my second husband, we're no longer married, made some choices that were not good for the marriage. I'll just say that. And, but I kept learning, I kept studying, and she kept mentoring and saying, go get this certification, do that. Being a coach, because I was already counseling people, but she started sending me neurodiverse people and couples to work with. And I actually found, Lori, that God had kind of equipped me for this work. I had been taking crib notes on my own life and my own opportunities for personal growth. What is healthy? What is wholesome? My marriage and family therapy background helped a lot. And I just read voraciously all the time about neuroscience and the cutting edge and what else are they finding out. So I kind of took to it, and I came up with my own version of the roadmap for hope and healing, which is tested and true. I mean, it starts with the couples separately, helping them each understand their own opportunities, settling everybody down, space and grace. I do have a chapter in the book. I talk about boundaries, the importance of being able to really grow and change with a good motivation that you have to bring to your own growth. And then how shame and the fear of rejection can really lock us down and help keep us stuck, right? So the book is a result of a lot of research that I helped Dr. Holmes do. Significant findings she interviewed, and we assessed the data of many, many Christian and non-Christian neurodiverse couples. And the focus was, what has helped you and what has not helped you? Has marriage counseling helped? Has pastoral counseling helped? If not, why? And oh my goodness, the data is significant. And so, plus she introduces a lot of neuroscience information. And then she invited, in addition to me, 5 other authors to write chapters and speak into this. Like I say, this one guy who found his cheat code, he and his wife write chapters about parenting. He writes about being a man, a father, who's coming into an awareness about this. And at the end, there is even information about what happens in some marriages where there is unhealthy dynamics and what to do in that case. Lots of resources. It's coming out in March. It's already available for pre-order. It's called Uniquely Us, gracefully navigating the maze of neurodiverse marriages. And it is more for the faith-based community, but it's for everybody because the information is so grounded and research-backed and good.
Yeah, well, like you mentioned, it's written for a Christian audience. Every book has a particular person they're writing for, but it doesn't mean other people wouldn't find something out of that. And I think about sometimes people of all faith backgrounds raising children in these different environments, whether they're Jewish or Muslim or Buddhist or Hindu. There's expectations and religious rules and rituals that often can be very off-putting or even very overwhelming for people who are on the spectrum, in addition to the institution of marriage and some of the expectations there. So I'm going to ask you 2 different questions, and we can unpack them each differently. And the first one is just to kind of continue on with what we were saying around couples, because I want to camp out here for a little bit. I'm thinking about, the couple that you mentioned who might be experiencing unhealth and maybe an avoidance of shame. And I would imagine people who have grown up and are now well into their adult years and have had to mask in certain situations to keep their job, to make it through school, to get a master's degree and doctorate even, because like you said, these are smart individuals in many, many cases, very capable. By the time they get to a certain point in the marriage and they might be making unhealthy decisions and they are ashamed, both of maybe how they were treated in kindergarten onward, or how they don't feel seen in their workplace and they can't bring their full selves to work. And then maybe shame because they've done some unhealthy things in the marriage and they really don't know how to look at it and they avoid that, which can lead to a whole other thing, which is narcissism and other stuff, as well. How would you approach someone like that who's curious but afraid to look inward at that shame?
Oh, that's a wonderful question because I actually think you're at the heart right now of the greatest opportunity I can participate in helping somebody with in unlocking the fear, the shame. First of all, understanding that that's happening. All right. A lot of people are in a survival mode and haven't yet taken the time or felt supported in looking at how did they get into survival mode. What pattern of trauma or neurosensitivity or cultural pressures or whatever got them into a place where now they're overwhelmed, they're in their survival brain, they're in fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, and they're just getting by, or they're not getting by. They're really misfiring and functioning, not optimally. Um, so when people are willing to begin to investigate that, I have a lot of material I give people. My method is to present information and ask them to cull through it to see what they identify with, and then be very specific to report back to me the things that they think they want to stop thinking and doing, and then what do they want to start thinking and doing. So this is, cognitive behavioral therapy, but I'm not telling them what to think and do. I'm asking them to figure that out. And of course, the material is rich in terms of suggestions and examples and inspiration. If somebody can get to a place and lean on a better sense of their self. Now, for Christians, we have the thinking that if we're in Christ, we're forgiven, we're redeemed, we're not under condemnation. We are no longer needing to live in shame and behind fig leaves like Adam and Eve, where we're shamed and so we blame somebody else. But we can live in honest admission of, yeah, I have faults, but I make mistakes, but I am not a mistake. Other things can get people there. All right. Other beliefs, even in AA, the Alcoholics Anonymous, you have a higher power that you're leaning on. All right. So it's a sense of something that defines you as actually okay, makes it safe for you to explore how you can grow and touch some wounds and heal some wounds that actually have nothing often to do with the marriage. Now, if you come into the marriage with deep little wounds that never really got healed or dealt with or even identified, yeah, that's all going to present in marriage. Marriage is the ultimate arena of test and challenge, and especially if you have kids. So, of course, it's going to come out in the marriage. So then the question is it somebody's fault? Is it your partner's fault? Or is it an arena of opportunity for both people and even their children to begin to deal with what made them so triggerable? And there's so many interventions, really, really good interventions. And I send people to trauma therapy, EMDR. I work with somatic body coaches that do, breathing and calmative mindfulness exercises. I refer people to dietitians and exercise trainers because there has to be a broad base of understanding how to calm our neurologies down, how to calm down. And if we can give space and grace to ourselves and to others, then we can really begin to navigate the path of exploration, change, growth, and healing. And so that's the model that I lean into. I open up the door for people and see how they want to go through that and what their particular path or higher power is or whatever that is. And then we leverage that and hopefully make progress.
So beautiful. And yes, I'm a firm believer in it. It takes a village for all of us, especially if we go through something traumatic or abusive. or our differences are so significant that we're, immigrating to a new culture and we need a whole new village of people to help us figure out how to speak this language, how to figure out Girl Scouts or whatever we're doing, right? But specifically, I know there are many professionals who work with children who are neurodiverse. You have occupational therapists, you have ABA therapists, RDI. There's all these different, methodologies, chiropractors, medical professionals, dietitians, all of that. But often when people are adults or they've not been diagnosed until they're adult, it's not as available. At the same time, it's sort of what we were talking about before when I said I had two questions was, unpacking a little bit about those parents out there who maybe are in a faith community. They're dropping their kid off for, classes to learn to read the Quran or their Sunday school, or their child is training to be a Buddhist monk and needs to be quiet and calm. And has to have a head shave and the haircuts are hard and whatever sensory environment is not working for them. And there's a lot of shame, both for the parents and the kid. And how would you talk to those parents out there who are trying to navigate their kid being in the world in a different way?
Yeah. Well, I would probably try to first address the parent's inclination to be ashamed, because a parent can't empower and help a child escape the burden of shame if they're themselves not able to do that. So if they're open, if they want me to fix their kid, I'm like, no, that's not going to work.
Yeah.
Let's talk about you.
Right.
I mean, I love Jesus said, yeah, let's take that log out of your O and I first, and then,
Right.
then you can help somebody else. And that's the approach I take. And in my own life, I mean, as I went upstream of my son's diagnosis, I had to say, okay, yeah. And initially I thought it was all his dad, and his dad and I are now best friends, and his new wife and I, we are all family. He's like my brother, we're just all healed and forgiven. We've made the best of it. But now I realize I had neurodiversity on my side of the fence. My grandfather, I think oh my goodness, it was the odds of my son being, or my children being something, were not low. It is a genetic trait. So I help parents see if they're curious about themselves and what are they basing their identity on. If it is to look good in their religious community and at all costs, then they're contorting their own individuality, their own giftedness, and negating some of the truths about themselves. And I don't want to challenge anybody's faith walk at all or any cultural choice. But, if there's no room for change and exploration because, these are the rules and I have to follow the rules. Okay, all right, good luck with that, And sometimes following rules is just a nice default for not having to deal with my mess, my internal mess, and really wrestling with the pain of how I even got here. Those are the rules. So if I'm just a stepping stone in their journey of inquiry, and sometimes I am, they come to me and I ask questions and they really don't want to talk about it. I'm like, okay, call me in a year or 10 or call somebody else. You may get there. You're not here now, but if they're there, Lori, if they're there and they're like, okay, yeah, I have these unrealistic expectations of myself, of my spouse. And yes, I have inflicted them on my children. And so if they can begin to give themselves that space and grace and permission to question and explore and be partnered with another parent that they're both going to do that, that is like so hopeful for the kids, because now the kids are guided into morality, but not chained to rules and structure that, they're going to just, in time, they will rebel, they will take drugs, they will do something else, they will estrange themselves. They're not gonna, that's not sustainable. You have to build with material based on what it is, not what you want it to be, right?
Really good advice, and so full of freedom, but not an easy journey for the parents, for the kids, for anyone. And so the things that we've talked about today are so, so important sometimes things that people don't say out loud. And so I hope that anyone, if you're listening today, if this has struck a chord with you in some way, that you'll look into the further resources Barbara's talking about. And I just want to say thank you for this conversation, for being so thoughtful and vulnerable with your own story about it, for this book that you've written. How can people find you and this book that's coming out to know further what your work is all about?
Thank you, Lori, for the opportunity again. Well, I'm going to guess maybe you'll have my website in your show notes. But if anybody were to Google Barbara Grant, Autism Relationship Coach, you're going to find me. Absolutely. I will give anybody and everybody at least 20 to 30 minutes of free time just to bless you and help you and support you. If there's something of mine that you want to engage with, I have different levels of participation, online things, drop-in things, one-on-one coaching. I even coach entire families. There's a family in Canada, they're farmers, and she has three neurodivergent sons, two autistic ADHD, one just ADHD. Her husband's autistic ADHD. She is an amazing, she's herself a professional in the arena, but they're pretty isolated up there. And I've talked to everybody in the family, in groups, in individuals, and I don't put rules around who can I help. If the door opens and I have something that can help somebody, I'm willing to go there. And I don't try to overstep my bounds in terms of expertise, but I will point you to resources. And I can't fix anybody. They have to want to be fixable and take responsibility, and I can help them as they're helping themselves.
So beautiful. Yes, I love the work that you're doing. Thank you so much for being on today. We will have you hang out with our difference makers to talk there. But thank you so much for this conversation. I wish you all the best with this book release, Barbara.
Well, God bless you for the work you're doing too, Lori.